Katoa, tēnā tātou ko tau mai ki tā tātou hui tēnei ata. Kai te mihi au i roto i te reo Māori, nā te mea ko te wiki tēnei o te reo Māori. Are mihi atuna ki a tātou katoa, ngā kai kaunihera ki ngā kaimahi, ki o tātou manuhiri anō hoki. Kia koutou hoki e mātakitaki mai ana i runga i te live stream, tēnā koutou. O tira, kia kōrua Fishera, kōrua ko Sandra, kare anō Sandra kia hono mai, ngari kai te mihi atu kia kōrua. And in English, tēnā tātou katoa mōrena, and in English, but anyway. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our hui. I'm chair today, so I drew the short straw as our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Kai Fong, is at home as she got a bit crook coming back from Canada. So, kei te pai, she'll be joining us online. So, to all those that have joined us online, live stream, e mihi atuna kia koutou. Just a few house rules before we get going. Our phones, can we put them on silent or turn them off, please? Tātou katoa, all of us. And we'll get cracking. We'll look for probably try and get a break around 11 o'clock mark, or whenever is an appropriate time to have a break. Ne? Ka pai? Kia ora. Hoi anō, me tima tata wa tātou hui ki te karakia. That's our Mayor Tapsel. Do our karakia, please.
Tēnā koe, Councillor Waru. Tūtaua mai I runga, I summon from above. Tūtaua mai I raro, I summon from below. Tūtaua mai I roto, I summon from within. Tūtaua mai I waho, I summon from the surrounding environment. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, the universal vitality and energy. Te mauri ora ki te katoa, infuse and enrich all present, enriched, unified and blessed. Haumie, huie, tai ki.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsel. Ka nui te mihi ki a koe. Before we proceed with our run sheet, I'd like to ask Councillor Maxwell, Uncle Trev, tuku a te rākau ki a koe, tēnei wā, as requested.
Thank you, Mr. Nephew. Thank you for the opportunity. I thought I'd just stand and just acknowledge Jeff Williams, aroha mai. We only found out the other night, and I'm not sure if this is your last meeting, but take the opportunity to say on behalf of us a huge thank you. And for me personally, I've been here with you the 10 years that you have been here. So this is to you and your family. Wish you well in the future. And kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui, mā te atua koutou, e manaki, kia rono tātou katoa. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell, Uncle Trev. Ka nui te mihi ki a koe. So we'll just keep running. Apologies, I call for apologies. There appear to be none. We're all here, aren't we? So we'll move on.
He's in Wellington.
Kia ora. Fisher?
Thank you. Just a signal that unfortunately I'll have to have an early departure, probably around 10:45.
No worries, that'll be noted. Thank you, Councillor Wang. So no motion required. Kia ora, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest anybody wishes to put forward, or conflicts of interest? There appears to be none. I will register my interest with regards to the Sala Street Reserve item. I will be excusing myself from that kōrero as I am a member of the trust that is involved in that kaupapa. So other than that, I think we're good to go. Ka pai? Just so you know, so I'd just like to lay some ground rules out first. So when we are in question time, please, can we ask questions? And when we are in discussion, kei te pai ka tuku a te rākau kia koutou, and you'll get your allotted time. Also, please don't be offended if I cut in to your kōrero. If I feel it's going on a bit, I will do that, but I don't do that with any malice. I just do that to keep the hui going. Nā reira, kei te pai tērā? Kia ora. Any urgent items on the agenda or need to be on the agenda? There appear to be none. Ka pai. We'll move on. Confirmation of minutes. Can I ask for a mover and a seconder, please, that the minutes of the Community and District Development Committee meeting held on the 9th of August 2023 be confirmed as a true and correct record? Councillor O'Brien, seconded Councillor Brown. All in favour say aye. Aye. E whakahe, carried. Staff reports. Ka pai, nei kei te miha tura ki a koutou. O te whenua rā o peka, nau mai haere mai. I tēnei hui, nau mai haere mai ki ngā tūru nei e wāte ana ki a koutou. Welcome. Me te mihi hoki ki a koe Auntie Helen, e mōhio ana, kai te taumaha Uncle Terry tēnei wā, kai te hohi pera. So just want to acknowledge that. So welcome, and I'm sure on all our, from all the councillors, nau mai haere mai. JP, kia koutou te raka.
Morning, everyone. I've just got the pleasure of introducing Helen Beckett, the chair of the Pika
Sorry,
Trust.
JP, I'm getting you schooled over here, so we've got to do the motion. I need to ask for a move and a second that the report titled Pika Development Update be received. Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Maxwell, all in favour say aye. Aye. E whakahe, ka kua mana. Over to you now, JP.
Morning, everyone. So I've just got the pleasure of introducing Helen Beckett here from the Pika Trust, and Mike Beattie, her development manager for the Pika block development here, just to give you an update on progress that's underway on the site, and probably to answer off any questions you may have about the development that are not commercially sensitive. So I will now just hand across to Helen to lead off.
Morena tātou katoa, morena Uncle Trev, Nev, whānau, because we're all just one big family, aren't we? It's my pleasure to be here again today to, sorry, Your Worship the Mayor. It's my pleasure to be here today to give an update, but I think before that give an overview of where we're at and how we came to be where we are today. And I think the story goes back 30 odd years, probably longer, when the land originally was under Māori affairs, came back to the owners in 1980, early 1980s. The trustees at that time decided, my father one of them, well, we're not shepherds because it was a sheep farm, but then decided that planting in pine would be certainly creating some wealth for the future. So we joint ventured at that time with Tumanui, who came on board to help share the costs of the harvest. And for 30 years, essentially, we just all as beneficiaries sat back and watched the trees grow. The harvest started in 2018. The block itself, is 600 hectares. 100 of those was not planted due to wetlands areas. The other 100 was not planted due to the power lines that run through our block, both Transpower and Unison that head south. But the 400 that was planted over 3 or 4 years, that harvest started in 2018. And I guess from that point, when I came in as chair at that time, the future was looking really good, and it still is looking really good, because they obviously created the putia from the harvest to move into stage, I call it stage 2, because stage 1 was creating the putia, which is what we've done. The industrial development was always part of the plan. It was part of the plan before in my father's time, and it was what we picked up, the rako that we picked up as trustees. So we as a trust understood that the land was industrial already zoned. We decided to bring on board the experts. Where we didn't have the knowledge, we engaged. And one of those key engagements back in the early days was with the Rotorua Lakes Council and the collaboration with the economic development crew. We see Peka as first and foremost for our people and creating benefit for the future for them. The wider picture is the economic development for Rotorua and what it will bring. It's not may, what it will bring to the city. And I guess there was a need. We have the goods, and it was a matter of getting together and making it happen. So we've progressed along with Mike as our development manager. I won't go too much into the detail. He can pick up that mantle, but things have got really exciting. We had a meeting of all our beneficiaries a couple of weeks ago. The excitement, you could feel it in the air on what is going forward, what is happening. Rotorua is really exciting. You know, and at this time I do have to give acknowledgement to my whanaunga down the road, Whakauē, who have given a wonderful asset to the city, particularly for the tourism sector. I would like to also at this time thank Deputy Mayor Sandra Kaifong and Council Official Wang for attending the soil turning that happened on the same day, unfortunately, as Waiariki. So it was a great occasion for us. I guess underpinning all of this, we're able to bring the development forward due to a funding application that was submitted to Kanoa and approved for $6 million loan. And we envisage earth moving to start subject to the environmental resource consent being finally approved. We expect that to happen later in next month. So the landscape literally will be changing in a fantastic way. I think what I need to also underpin here is the environmental component of what it is that we're doing and protecting the waterways that run through our farm, through into the Puringa and on to Rotorua. So we receive the awa from the headwaters, and we have both tūreporepo, waihuahua kākahi, and the kauaka that flow through our block and flow under the road to form the Puringa on the other side, on State Highway 5 side. So we're a huge part of our development will be, we've engaged an environmental specialist who's given us a fantastic report and ways to protect those and replanting, bringing back to life really, because those waterways have, well, the size of the streams and stuff have got a little bit away on us over the years with the trees. But yeah, exciting times, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any. Aye.
Ka pai. With that, we'll get into questions. So, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. Nice to see you again, Helen. I recall on our first council meeting where we actually conducted any business.
True.
We met you. Just a couple of questions. Do I understand correctly that this development is for lease only for people who wish to be
Correct.
On site? Yeah.
So, sorry, yeah, the whenua we will retain ownership of the land.
Okay. Is that unique in Rotorua, or is that usual practice? Perhaps JP might be able to help if anybody else can't.
I might tag out here. Tag Mike in. He's got the answers. Or JP.
Okay. No, it's not unique. A lot of land is leasehold in Rotorua. The commercial properties are owned by Maori trusts and leased. I need it closer, do I? I don't speak loud enough. I apologise. But so leasehold land is quite a normal way to go forward with industrial land. And in Rotorua, it's certainly a standard format. So we're finding a lot of interest, and it's not causing...
Maybe if we... Sorry, Mike, not to... Yeah, see if we can get that mic to go for you.
Does that sound better?
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, just to sort of reinforce what I was saying, leasehold interest is quite typical in Rotorua, and it's certainly quite typical industrial estates, and we're finding no shortage of interest despite the fact that we are only offering leasehold land.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's interesting to say that, Mr. Chair. Just a question on the stream. You mentioned the environmental side of things that you're making a contribution to. I've been driving out to Murupara to where my mother lives, or lived, and the stream opposite where they're putting in the rabbit-proof, or should I say
Wallaby
fence, along the edge of the road? Is that through your block?
So that's a Kawaka stream that runs alongside State Highway 5.
Right.
And it comes along State Highway 5 and joins up with the other two. They collect together on the Peka side of the block, go under the road, and that's where the Puarenga starts. So the Kawaka, yes, runs alongside State Highway 5.
So is the land alongside State Highway 5, is that Waka Kotahi's responsibility or is that yours?
So from the stream, if you go halfway in bare feet, halfway back towards the whenua is our responsibility. The middle of the stream back to the road is Waka Kotahi.
Right. So they would be the ones that would be responsible for clearing all that blackberry and unpleasant stuff that's choking.
Yeah, I think there's collaboration between them and us as well in terms of that. We do have along that area a gentleman by the name of Joe Fleet, whom some may or may not have heard of. He's very persistent, this man, but very good at and has a strong belief in what he does. So he's been working along that area for the last 30-odd years, planting natives, doing all sorts of wonderful things and bringing that part of the stream back to life. And his vision is to move further north towards Rotorua. He did take some advantages that weren't his to take, sadly. He's still working there, but within, we've reined him in a little bit. We've had to rein him in a little bit, but he's done a fantastic job along there. But I think even though it is Waka Kotahi, in the black and whites of it all, we take that responsibility. We certainly wouldn't want to develop a piece of whenua with all the scrub looking in from the outside. So our development obviously includes a lot of that work as well. And I would suspect we would extend further past those boundaries as well, because it's we want it to look aesthetically good coming from both State Highway 5 and State Highway 30 as well.
As well as being healthy, of course.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I think, JP, you've got something to add as well?
Mr. Chair, I'm just kind of conscious that, that we're drilling into some detail and questions that might actually be covered in a couple of slides of the presentation that Mike and Helen have here. I just wonder if it might be opportune just probably to scroll through those slides and let them do that presentation, because I think some of the questions then give us the chance to deep dive off those.
It's a good idea. We'll get straight into the presentation, then
I'll just talk to that presentation and the image that we have up on screen is my niece Kahuro Tete Purupi. Who now fronts our campaign in terms, and so she's of the land and from the land as well, my brother Jami's daughter and Anaha. So yes, she was, that baby Kahu. So she's the front of our development, lives on the block with us as well, and a real beautiful face to have there.
And you can see her at the junction of State Highway 5 and 30 as of about yesterday, I think. Friday last week, Helen tells me. So should I just start? Okay. So just to set it in place, this is the block that we're developing. And is there a light on this? Anyway.
I think if you use the top bit and point it at it. Yep.
Okay, so you can see that area there on State Highway 5 is stages 1 and 2, and they're the development that we're undertaking at the moment. Earthworks all being done for the whole of that, but we are only developing the engineering, the roading on stage 1. Somewhere up there was a line about the first 13 sections of stage 1, the balance is stage 2. The wider block is development. We have interest in all that land you see to the left-hand side of this area, and quite a significant interest in stage 1 as it goes forward. So that sets the scene. We've done the detailed design, the consents are in progress. We expected to get our earthworks consent already, but they are now considering the last of our environmental presentations. One's about how we're protecting the waterways and the wetlands. That's with the council, and we're just waiting for them to consider that. Contractor submissions closed last month. We are considering the appointment of a contractor on Thursday, tomorrow afternoon. And so we hope to have a contractor appointed before the end of the month, but it will be subject to us getting our resource consent in place. Our plan to have the whole subdivision completed in June next year. So things are moving pretty quickly. We've got our pricing in from the contractors, and it gives you a bit of a hiccup, but we're pretty much satisfied with everything that's going forward at the moment financially. It's very good having Kānoa on board. Having $6 million in your back pocket is a great way to go. So as I say, it is a mixture of equity and from the Regional Strategic Partnership Fund, and that's been a huge boost to the trust and to the development. And there's also Council's conditional commitment to the external infrastructure, which is essential to us moving forward. Without that, we can't move. Consents, as I said, the earthworks consent, the engineering consent's prepared, it's ready to lodge. We have a dust control consent underway now, and the subdivision consent itself will be in Christmas time. So all of that's just a sequence of progress that we're making. No final, I can't think of the right word, but there's nothing stopping us at the moment. Design, think of this as an industrial islands in an environmental setting. We started out just looking at the land and going, well, we want to protect the stream, so let's put 50 metres around a stream. That doesn't get touched no matter what happens. That is back with the Peka Trust to plant, to develop as it used to be. There is a very strong focus in our design around the whenua and the wai, and we have a comprehensive on-site stormwater management system that will start at each lot. It will work through our subdivision and then through a series of ponds before it gets anywhere near any waterways coming into town. It's as comprehensive a system as I've ever designed, so I'm very pleased with it. Contractors, 3 firms shortlisted. Pricing, we're about to make our appointment. The Trust will no doubt consider everything tomorrow night, and there'll be a few questions, and it'll take us a week or two to get the contractor on board, but it's very close to happening. Marketing, the peka.nz is a website. If you look at that, it's also on Facebook, it's also on LinkedIn, and we are getting a really significant build-up of interest, which is lovely. We're adding content to that. We've issued our first newsletter, and the signage, I said it was being prepared for installation, and it went up on Friday, so I'm very pleased. Tenants. So market interest, we have a very strong interest. I've got actively more than a dozen that I'm actively working with right now. Just which of those will come forward depends, but this is a significant part of our 12 hectares. And in addition, there is a completely separate tenant seeking a lease, a much larger tenancy. It's the land you saw on the left-hand side outside of stage 1, and we're just negotiating an agreement to lease around that as well. So things are looking very promising. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I guess if you don't mind, we'll get straight back into questions and points of clarification. So, Councillor Patterson will go. It was Councillor Maxwell, I believe, that had a pātai. Then Councillor Kiriopa, then Councillor Patterson.
Actually, I'll wait to... Kei te pai, the slide showed it for me, but I'll wait for the debate, and I'd like to say some things then.
It won't be debated, it's a information presentation, so you can have a kōrero.
I better have a kōrero now. Well, first of all, the question I was going to touch on to Helen, you Well, first of all, huge congratulations with the progress that your trust is making. Tēnā korua, kia koe tū, Mike. The question I was going to ask you, said you have already had some hui since our presentation you gave us last year. You said they were excited, we were excited too. But you feel you've got a really good tautoko and the support from not only whānau, but the people around there.
Absolutely. From when I said we had a special general meeting back in March to get things before the Māori Land Court in terms of the longer leases. So I think under Māori Land you can only have 52 years. So we went to Māori Land Court with a number of submissions moved by the people and supported by the people to extend those leases to 99 years plus. We then had an AGM a couple of weeks ago where we updated. So we're keeping our beneficiaries updated regularly. But in saying that, as trustees and myself as chair, we're there working for the people, you know, and that's our responsibility. But keeping them informed as much as we can along the way.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping us up to date as well. And I congratulate you to Helen as chair and your leadership with the trust. Wish you well for the project. You're watching with interest. Thank you.
Kia ora, uncle.
Councillor Kiriopa and then Councillor Patterson.
Kia ora, thank you through the chair. 50 metres along the waterways, that's excellent. That's outstanding, really. I was just interested, the 600 acres that you didn't plant in forestry to protect the wetlands, I take it those wetlands are still being protected?
They are. So there were 600 hectares originally. The block is 600 plus hectares just. 400 was planted in pine, 100 lost due to the power lines, and 100 that wasn't planted because of the waterways and the wetland areas within the block which are protected. And in saying that, we're working quite closely with Tumanui and Kapinga as well as a collaborative on a plan to, there's a significant wetland on the Kapinga block that comes onto ours as well. So outside of all this development stuff, there's a whole lot of other things going on as well, you know. So yeah.
I've just got another question. Obviously, the Utuhina, we have massive issues with the industrial being alongside the river. And just in terms of the policy for environmental protection or protection of waterways, it's woefully inadequate. Regional council can't actually even tell us what heavy metals are going into the Utuhina. The policing of consents is woefully inadequate as well. So I was just wondering, has PECA considered doing more than just making sure you're up to the current policy?
Absolutely, we have. In fact, we've gone above and beyond without creating too much confusion at Bay of Plenty Regional Council, you know, so we've gone above and beyond what is required. We've also engaged an environmentalist who's whānau as well, Wirumururu, and he's doing regular checks of the water. You know, they go in and take a test and send it away and see what's there. So I think, is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Mike?
So if I can just explain how we've gone about this. Because the land is leasehold, we have drafted clauses in the lease that requires each occupant to manage their own emissions, that is both to air, to land, to water, before it comes into the subdivision itself. Then we have a management plan for the subdivision itself before it goes into the stormwater attenuation ponds. So it actually arrives in our property, which is the subdivision, already treated for both pollution and quantity, so massive storm events. And then we manage it through the roads, and then we manage it through the actual stormwater attenuation system, a series of ponds that flow down the hill, and eventually it arrives back. And we have a policy that says we only put 80% of what was there before we started development back into the stream. So we're required to retain at least 20% of all the stormwater within the block itself. So that's how we're managing it.
Well done, that sounds outstanding, and I wish you well with it, and I hope that that will actually set the level in the bar in Rotorua.
Well, it does give us the opportunity to be proactive. Waiting for council to act against some polluter can be a long process. As a landlord, you have a much more immediate impact. That's our approach.
Kia ora. Councillor Patterson?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you. Just following on from Councillor Kiriopa's question, once it's passed through the stormwater attenuation ponds and is released into the stream, are you going to be having regular tests done by independent people who can say, yep, this is working well? Or?
We will be.
Okay. Cool.
Yes. I mean, and as much as I said, we've engaged an environmentalist. That's his job, you know, to do those testing, to do that testing as well.
Fantastic. And the other question goes back to the development itself and the numbers of submissions that you've had for leases already, which is exciting. Well done. Without giving away who or any financial issues, just wondering what's the balance between Rotorua businesses looking to transfer from where they are now to out-of-town businesses coming in and starting fresh?
Tap in, Mike.
Thank you, Helen. It's about 50-50. The big development that I talked about at the end, that is external. So that's a whole new industry coming to town. Of the, what have I got, 12, 13 that are on my list at the moment, about half of those are looking to relocate out of the centre of the city for a variety of reasons. Growth is one of them. And the other half are people who are looking to bring an industry that fits somewhere within the forestry farming sector, because this is an area that has that is central to their resource.
Thank you very much. Exciting.
Oh, well, there appears to be no more questions. So, you have a comment, JP?
Through Mr. Chair, just I have to channel my Stavros here. So just so that you're aware, one of the good things about the initial expressions of interest that the Trust has received is it's given us some quantums of water and wastewater. So Stavros is taking that information forward into some of the design work he's currently undertaking. So he's got the design proposals for the water and wastewater for the site. The other great thing about the progress that's been made by the Trust is it also enables us to make sure that our investment into that connecting infrastructure can be timed so that it's in place to support the development, so it's lease ready when they finish construction. So Stavros is working closely with Mike just to make sure that design capacity is right and also that we've got the timing correct as far as that is concerned. Probably the last thing that we would be proposing is, if you recall the resolution, and I think it's covered in the report, was talking about connection agreements or development contributions. Probably the timing enables us to come back to you probably as we lead into the development of the long-term plan for you to make a decision about whether you think it should be included within the development contributions policy. So that might be a really effective tool for us to make sure that that connection and the repayment of our investment of that supporting infrastructure can be correctly attributed to each of the sites through development. And obviously this also extends capacity to enable some of the western end of the Waipaha Valley where also there's additionally zoned land there. So again, that's a conscious choice for us about where that pipe work will go through the state highway and cross across into the Peka block.
Thank you, JP. Did you have some final comments?
I think just my final comment today would be I'm really proud to be representing Peka Trust, and I think it's an amazing, it's fantastic that as iwi Māori we can do these things, you know, for the people, by the people, but everybody benefits. So I think it's a fantastic venture for us going forward. Huge.
Thank you very much.
I just want to see some dirt turned. You know, I've been watching for like 3 years for someone to come up with a shovel and dig a hole. But we had that. But yeah, I'm just really excited to start to see some of that stuff moving.
I'm sure you do. I look forward to it too. Yeah, I know what it's like to wait and wait and wait, and when it finally all happens, it's a beautiful thing. So I think I share my colleagues' mihi and actually acknowledgement of the mahi Pika Trust is doing, how it's contributing to our community. Katoa. Hara ko te iwi Māori anake, hara ko te arawa anake, engari katoa, me papatu anuku anō hoki. So, mihi atu ana ki a koutou katoa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we exit?
I think you might be straight up after this, aren't you, JP? Kia ora. We'll move right on to our next kaupapa, which is the deliberations for the proposed change in purpose for part of the Rotorua Cemetery Reserve. And so at this point, I'm going to tag out, and I'm going to ask Deputy Co-Chair Greg Brown to take over as I flagged my conflict right at the start of the hui. So kia ora tātou.
Thank you, councillors. In the hot seat. Over to you, JP. No, sorry, getting schooled again. Could we have a mover and a second for the report to be received? Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Barker. All those in favour, aye? Aye. Against? Carried.
Morena, new chair. I won't say too much. I'll hand across to Steph, who's pinged me previously for sealing the discussion. So I will cease at this point and hand across to Steph to guide you through the report.
Morena. So the purpose of this report today is to draw to a conclusion the item on the proposed change of purpose for the northern part of the Rotorua Cemetery Reserve. You will recall that in December last year a decision was made to progress the proposed change in purpose as an interim step to enable Pukeroa Orua Whata Trust to investigate housing on this part of the reserve while we progressed a process to revoke the reserve classification and have that land returned to Pukeroa. The consultation process was undertaken over a 5-week period. We received 72 submissions and we had 3 submitters speak at the last committee meeting. Of those, 27 were in support and 45 opposed. You do have a summary of submissions in your report along with the full catalogue of submissions. The majority of concerns raised and those opposed to it related to effects of a proposed housing development. We do not have a housing development in front of us. All this decision does is allow Pukeroa to investigate whether housing is feasible on this part of the reserve. Any effects associated with housing, whether it be traffic, noise, reverse sensitivity from the proximity to the cemetery, would need to be dealt with through a consenting process. Which may or may not include public notification, depending on, I guess, that assessment of effects. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Lee. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, my understanding is that some of the Māori councillors at the table have affiliations with Ngāti Whakaui and or Pukeroa Trust. So I was wondering if, for the sake of transparency, they might like to explain why there isn't a conflict for them.
Yeah, sorry, we're not allowing the question. A councillor can't ask that other councillors declare their conflicts of interest. We've already dealt with that, so we're moving on. Anything else?
Sure. I do recall Councillor Donaldson doing that in the previous term, for what it's worth. Actually, I have no further questions, but I will be engaging in a debate.
Councillor O'Brien, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Acting Chairman or Co-Chair. Thank you, and through the Chair. Thank you, Steph, and thank you, JP, for another report on this item. Could I just ask, and I have raised this before, we've still yet that I've seen from the previous 2 times this has been brought up, either geotechnical or some official advice about the actual problems with the land. Personally, I have no problems with the return. I just want to be for sure that this property can't be used for the use that it is being designated for. And if that being the case, I'm more than happy to vote in favour. But this is like the third time we've discussed this and we still haven't seen anything presented to Council. So could I ask for a response? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. I may need to refer this question to Rob, but my understanding is that there has been multiple attempts to undertake burials in this part of the reserve, and the water table has always been too high. With this item going on, they recently did some bore tests, and the water level was higher than usual, I guess, with all the rain. But sorry, I am just going to refer this to Rob because he has the specifics around this.
Thank you, if I may. The site historically did have some burials in it, and those needed to be reinterred and taken up to Kauai. They were shallow burials at the time. There was some work done then, and then just recently we have done some more test bores, and water depth was in the sort of 1.5 to 1.6 metre range. And the water was quite warm. So a normal burial is a minimum of sort of 2 metres. So the water table at that stage, which was a mid-Lake Rotorua level, so it wasn't particularly high or particularly low, that area would have been, the bottom of the grave sites would have been immersed in the water. And that part of the reserve is actually about 1.5 to 2 metres lower than where the actual graves are, where the cemetery is itself. So it is quite a lot lower than it appears just as you're driving past. So it's not a suitable site for traditional burials.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could just add, more than happy with your explanation. It just, as I say, this is about the third time that we've addressed this issue, and I've still yet to see an official paperwork explaining that on it. I've heard you say that it's unsuitable. I get that. It just would have been good for us as councillors, I believe, to have had some official paperwork in those lines. But thank you anyway. Thank you.
Just to add to that, we have done some preliminary geotech with respect to potential housing, just to ensure that it can be developed. And I guess the difference there is that housing can be engineered, burial sites cannot be.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Thank you, Steph and JP and Rob. Just actually following on from Councillor O'Brien's questions, I notice amongst the feedback from the community that there were also some concerns about not having information about other areas or other uses for the ground, such as parks and memorial walks and places to inter ashes and those kinds of things. Has there been any work done in that direction, and is there a report or something that we have on that sort of information to inform our decision making too and to help our public understand?
No, we haven't. To be clear, we haven't done any further investigation on the possibility of using it for other, I guess, cemetery memorial type purposes.
Thank you. I just noticed that, as part of the consultations, 62% of people were against for various reasons. Will there be any chances, you did mention there may be further consultation that happens going forward as it heads into the next stages if we pass this today? What would trigger further consultation, please?
So the council decision in December was two things. One, an acknowledgement that the land was not being used for the purpose that it was gifted and that it should be returned to Pukeroa or Whakaue Pukeroa on behalf of Whakaue. And secondly, that an interim step was to enable this change in purpose for the housing. So following a decision today, the next step would be for council to make a decision to formally commence that reserve revocation process. That will be another council decision, and that includes further community consultation. But that pathway is to return the land, it's not for a change of purpose.
And probably just going on to the discussion around, so if there's a desire now to progress housing in partnership with Pukeroa, which they've indicated their interest in pursuing some housing, they will then have to look at all of the issues that go into a consenting process. So we've done preliminary geotech to determine whether it was feasible at all. The second part is obviously then more detailed geotech as they develop up a consent process. And again, in a consenting environment, it may trigger a notification as well. I think the underlying zoning under that reserve, and this is again part of our district plan issues, is residential. So it's got residential standards across it. So again, the density, the amount of lots to be developed, the scale, the individual geotech locations, and the traffic and noise, which would be some of the constraints that would have to be addressed in looking at the site. Similarly, we've got a residential zone adjacent to an industrial zone on the western side. Clearly in that sort of situation there would be concerns about reverse sensitivity, so buffering would be really critical. So where that occurs in other places for new developments, that there is usually a zone quite significant, either planted or in some way landscaped to act as a buffer of either sound or other sort of reverse sensitivity issues between sites.
Thank you.
Councillor Kiriopa.
Thank you, through the chair. I think, for the most part, from what I hear from the people I represent, we obviously support the return of the land. But the concern is not wanting to house people vulnerable people in areas that are going to cause issues with their health. I'm just interested in that area. We're always interested in returning our Papakainga residential areas back to residential. With what's been highlighted, particularly in the Bay of Plenty Regional Council's submission around not wanting to house people in areas that are already struggling with pollution, and with the aspirations of Ngāpuna to move the industrial out of Ngāpuna, is the majority of this, I don't know if you can answer this question, but is the majority of the pollution issue with what's existing in Ngāpuna, or is it also what's along White Street? Because I'm interested in long term, if we were to put housing there, if we managed to move the industrial out of Ngāpuna, would those areas be healthier than they are now, and that wouldn't be as much of an issue, or does White Street still make housing in that area still detrimental to health?
I'm not sure I'm able to answer that question, unfortunately. Though from my knowledge of the industry around White Street, it doesn't have the same discharge as what is currently around Ngāpuna. And just to, I guess, reiterate what JP said, that would definitely need to be a matter that would need to be considered through a consenting process, is that effect on the residential area and the reverse sensitivity.
I think it goes to some of the key concerns that people are raising are very valid. So while we're here making a fundamental decision about the first step, which is to change the purpose of the reserve from cemetery to local purpose housing. So that's the fundamental decision. And one of the submitters, David Tapsell from Pukeroa, highlighted in his submission, hey, this is the first step. So that's the decision you need to make, is do you support that change in purpose? A lot of the concerns that have been raised through the submissions go to the effects of a housing development. Now, those are really important to pass over to Pukeroa, so when they start thinking about, if the decision is yes, when they start getting into that more detailed view, really important considerations to be brought into their thinking around their consent application or their designs. So none of that none of those concerns that were raised should be lost in the conversation about the potential development of the site. Probably the other part, and it was part of the initial concept that was, I think, presented as just an image, was quite a low use of the site. So making sure there was plenty of space around it to give sufficient buffering in all those directions. There's a significant natural area to the southwest of the site, which acts as another sort of barrier between the rest of the cemetery site and this area. So there's a number of considerations that will have to be carefully considered into any steps if you make a decision today to support that change of use.
Just adding to that, if the housing does go in there, then it's going to mean that council are obviously going to have a good need to relook at the industrial in that area and how to best support the residential areas, moving forward in the long term.
Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. My question just speaks to some of the concerns that were raised around the proximity of housing to both industrial but also the cemetery. I'm aware that we already have housing in that area. Are you able to speak to the proximity of that housing to it? I think a lot of the concerns that are being raised would have been just as valid for those homes that are there. And I also want to acknowledge that as the city continues to grow, at the time that the industrial and commercial were established in that area, our population was much smaller and residential areas were elsewhere. As we grow, I would see it would be more logical to continue to expand residential close to the city, our services, our health areas, and also the schools. And actually it should be the industrial and commercial area that we're looking at. Is this the most appropriate place near already existing residential? So can you just explain the proximity of other housing and whether there is a concern there?
Thank you. There is existing residential housing in this area located on Sala Street, Margarita Street, and in and around McIntyre, including Glen Bay Retirement Village. It is actually closer to the crematorium and the existing industrial area than the northern part of the Rotorua Cemetery Reserve.
Councillor O'Brien. Patterson, sorry.
Thank you, Acting Mr. Chair. Mr. Acting Chair, I think that's probably it. Just a question on the cemetery side of things. Some of the concerns in the submissions were basically we're running out of space. So Koware, I understand, is currently in the report it says we've got an extra 200 plots allocated for that, and that discussions are ongoing with Mana Whenua about long-term extension of Koware as well, which obviously would mitigate the concerns because still a lot of people value their loved ones being interred in the ground. So from a long-term perspective, is this council going to have any concerns as we come into the LTP about cemetery space?
We certainly will need to signal in the LTP that there is a need for further cemetery space. Currently at Kauai, about 60% of the area is developed, and there's about 40% to be developed. So we are in discussions with the trustees about the proportionality of that development or between public and whakaui space. And even if that carries on through, there will be some development costs associated with that. And then the other area, the council has Taru Kenga set aside, and as we work through those discussions, we'll be needing to think further out about more space at some stage. But the issue that we've got with Northern Sala is that it's just not suitable.
Kapai, thank you.
Councillor Lee, you've had you go, but have you got something that's new to the discussion? I feel like it's been a good discussion so far.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. I am following on from Councillor Barker's line of inquiry. So the reason this proposal is being brought to us, as I understand, is that it's no longer able to be used for cemetery purposes, which was the purpose of the intended gift. That's correct, yes. So, like Councillor Barker, I'd like to acknowledge the 62% of submitters who submitted against this proposal. Some of the suggestions focus on cemetery-related purposes that this reserve could be used for, which includes using this land for a new chapel, which a future council might like to consider. If it's able to be used for housing, it would potentially be able to be used for a new chapel, would it not?
Yes, it could be used for a new chapel based on the existing geotech. It could be developed there, but we do have an existing chapel in a I guess better location in terms of proximity to existing cemetery facilities.
Mm-hmm. And it could be the land could be used for a tree trust kind of arrangement for ashes to be placed around.
The land was gifted for cemetery purposes for a burial ground, so I think it would be a whakaui decision about whether that was consistent with the original gifting, which we have not had that discussion.
Yeah, spreading, okay. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien, you've had your go too.
Thank you for your indulgence. Mr Chair, could I just ask JP, if the proposing goes ahead where we hand over a lease so that whakaui can look at developing housing, under what system does that come under now? Would it be MDRS or does it depend on the type of proposal? The reason why I'm asking is what aspect or input would Bay of Plenty Regional Council or Waka Kotahi have whether housing could move forward given its, shall we say, special location?
The site is one parcel, so the application of MDRS in this situation would mean 3 houses only. And assuming that on that basis they could deal with their stormwater without triggering any discharge consent requirements, then the Regional Council would not be involved. But I would strongly anticipate that 3 houses on the reserve is not what the aspiration is, so it will require a consenting process and involvement from Regional Council for any housing development.
It would probably trigger a comprehensive consent, so 4+ for the site, which then starts bringing in a whole bunch of other considerations like traffic assessments, and obviously then that enables some engagement with Waka Kotahi around sound buffering, who have been quite keen further along in some of the rest home developments to see bunds to manage noise. So again, that's part of the anticipation of what is quite a significant footprint of a site, that there is a whole range of opportunities to mitigate some of those effects or certainly deal with concerns raised by other parties. And that's why I think the input that we've received will be very valuable to carry forward into Pukeroa and their thinking about what could occur on the site.
I'd just have a follow-up, very quick one, please, Mr Chairman. So could I ask, what's the impending sort of need for haste when, you know, from previous experiences, consenting things, especially where Regional Council or Waka Kotahi are involved, do tend to be, shall we say, time-consuming? Thank you.
I don't understand the haste question. What we're doing here is taking the first step, which is unless it has a fundamental change in purpose, nothing can proceed. So if we don't have a change in purpose from cemetery reserve to local purpose housing, then there's no opportunity for us to enter into an arrangement where Pukeroa can progress that. Because it's now no longer being used as a cemetery, there's a parallel process which goes to the return of the land to whakaui and Pukeroa. So that's a process which can take a significant amount of time as it grinds its way through government. Probably the timing around the return of Ariki Kapakapa, the motor camp discussions which have had, and any other parcels, sometimes it's 10 plus years. So the intention here is if we've changed the status, we're in a position for them to begin a consenting discussion, which may take some time, but at least they have that opportunity. If we simply say we no longer need it for cemetery purposes, we will enter into the handback process, which obviously will run in parallel. It could be a decade before the land is returned.
Just one question from me. Why 30 years for a lease?
We don't anticipate that they'll need to use all of their 30-year lease if the reserve classification, the lifting of the classification and the return of the land goes reasonably well, but it does give security to any potential government funders or other community funders for a housing proposal.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Steph, JP, Rob, for your presentation. You can step away from the table. We are looking for a mover and a seconder for the motion.
Just a question, Mr. Chair, before we go through, if you might.
Yes, Councillor Barker.
Just looking at the motion, there's two different numbers in each of those two different parts of the resolution. Office Plan 585263 and Office Plan 285263. Are they supposed to be different or should they be the same?
I'm sorry, they should be the same. And I can just go away and confirm which one that is if that's...
While we're getting that clarified, we are looking for a mover and a seconder. We've got Councillor Maxwell moving and Councillor Patterson seconding. We'll move into discussion. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wholeheartedly support this recommendation, the recommendations that are here, and at the same time acknowledge the generosity of Ngāti Whakaue in the first instance, not only this property but many parcels of land within Rotorua, the generosity in giving, and it is being returned because it is not being used for the purpose. And I also want to acknowledge Ngāti Whakaue through Puka o Ruawhata for the vision they're showing in thinking ahead to utilise it for things that are important to our district. One being, we're all aware that we have a chronic housing problem, but that's for them to decide. And so I want to hopefully ensure that I hope this goes through. And sometimes I feel disappointed, and sometimes Waimara and Ngāti Whakaue, how many hoops sometimes they have to jump through after giving something very generously, and then have to jump through so many hoops just to have the land returned. But nor reira, thank you. Support the motions.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. Yes, I tautoko Councillor Maxwell's comments. I recall quite clearly David Tapsell saying to us at his kōrero that they haven't decided what they're going to do with this. The issue at hand here is that it's no longer fit for purpose, so it's being returned as per the agreement. And it's then up to them to decide what they're going to do with it going forward. And I would hope that housing is one of the options. As far as the noise and buffering, etc. goes, you only have to go to the Linmore Rise development, which is right smack bang on Tenai Road. My stepmother lived in one of the buildings right on the edge of the road, and you could not hear a sound so long as they had their ranch slider closed. So the buffering that they did with those berms, the plantings, and the soundproofing on those buildings shows that it can be done to a point where they've created themselves a wonderful little community there, so that could be easily replicated in that site. But again, I'd go back to that's their decision, Ngāti Whakaue's decision to decide as to what they're going to use with it. So I would wholeheartedly support this.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to play the role of devil's advocate on behalf of 62% of submitters. The purpose of the reserve for cemetery purposes we've seen is clearly able to be used for the sprinkling of ashes and the planting of a tree trust, or the establishment of a newer, bigger, better chapel if a future council chose to do that. I understand the current chapel is in some state of disrepair and worthy of our attention at some stage and worthy of funding. But reserves have a greater purpose than that. I remember reading Hamueda Mitchell's book on the history of Rotorua. He was the first town planner, his ancestor, his Tapuna, was the first town planner of Rotorua. And it is, of course, correct that Rotorua has lots of reserves gifted by Ngāti Whakauē, and that should be acknowledged. The reasoning for the gifting of those reserves is not just for the specific purposes that they were given, but to model Rotorua after Aberdeen. And this was in the late 19th century, when the idea of having reserves to make a city more attractive, more appealing to live in. So Rotorua back in the 1880s was competing against all other cities that were being developed around New Zealand at the time. So to have lots of reserves in the city would make it attractive for people to choose as their home. In my culture, when a gift is given, that is the end of the interest in the object being given. And it doesn't make sense to me that having given a gift, one would seek to have that gift returned. This returning of land has been a theme for some time, and a recent example was of the Ariki Kappa Kappa Golf Course, which was returned to the same Pukeroa Trust in 2021, at which time David Tapsell, Deputy Chair of the Pukeroa Trust, was interviewed on Te Arawa FM by former Councillor Mercia Yates. And I'd like to quote the Deputy Chair, David Tapsell, at that time, because I think it's relevant. So Mercia Yates asked, now is the land return part of a bigger story? David Tapsell answered and said, yes, it is for us. At Pukeroa, Ngāti Whakaue's, one of our key kaupapa, is looking to undertake ways to return as much of our traditional whenua as we possibly can. So this is an ongoing journey. We've had a couple of good successes over the last 10 or 15 years. This is part of that, kind of a never-ending journey for us. It started before my time and will continue after my time. Just getting back to pre-1880 is our motto, as much as we can achieve that. I think this land is able to be used for cemetery purposes, and I think it is an asset to the community, and it can be developed yet further in an attractive way, in an appealing way, that will benefit future generations.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Mayor Tapsell, and then Councillor Kiriopa.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you. Look, I do, like Councillor Maxwell, want to acknowledge the significant gifting that Ngāti Whakaue have given for the establishment of the Rotorua Township. However, I do want to disagree with Councillor Lee's statements. It was very clear that the gifting in this example was for cemetery purposes. So unless it was going to be used for cemetery purposes, it was very clear in the agreement at that time that it will be returned. And this is, even in this modern day and age, monitored and reviewed and approved or not by the Ngāti Whakaue Gifted Reserves Protocol Agreement. So I am really pleased to be able to support the intentions of Ngāti Whakaue, and actually the questions that I raised today regarding the concerns around the housing. When I read the submissions that were presented to Council, and we are really grateful for all of the people taking the time to make submissions. It was clear to me that many of those that were opposing perhaps didn't have a full understanding of what we are dealing with when some of them would like it to be used for other purposes, such as play and recreation facilities. However, very clearly that's not our decision at Council. The only decision for us to make is whether or not we support it going to the next steps, because it cannot, and we've been told that by the experts, it cannot be used for burial grounds. And I think when you look at the water table being about 1.5 to 2 metres below, I wouldn't even want to attempt to bury anyone in there. So I think that's very understandable, and very happy to be able to support that. I think what we have seen very clearly in Rotorua is also the urgent need for housing solutions, especially for those housing solutions that are affordable. And if we can support locally led social housing, then I think that that's the best option for us. So being able to give not only the people of Ngāti Whakaue, but actually local developers the opportunity to build these, as opposed to government agencies which we can't control and which we don't control who goes into them. I think that that would also be a great solution. So again, acknowledge that we do already have a lot of housing on the northern side of this development, and that is actually closer than the housing on the southern side. So yes, we do acknowledge that there are issues that have been raised, however, nothing that we can't achieve. And I think once this is all concluded and we do have homes for the many people that need them, they will also be grateful for the decision and leadership that we have undertaken. So thank you. I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. Councillor Kiriopa.
Thank you. I think I'd just like to add a little context. Comments made by our relation, what's his first name? Tapsell. David. Have sort of been raised and made to look like Ngāti Whakaue might have given some land, and it's unreasonable that it would be asking for it back if it's not being used for the purposes that it would give it. And I'd just like to give a bit of context to the comments that David would have made and the reasons why Ngāti Whakaue feel strongly about this. And that is that obviously we know in 1880 Ngāti Whakaue gifted 700 acres towards the development of Rotorua City to further capitalise on tourism and other benefits offered by Pākehā society at that time. But by 1907, only 6,000 of the 630,000 acres within the Rotorua district remained in the hands of Te Aroha, meaning 99% had passed through the Māori Land Court into the hands of Crown and Pākehā settlers in just 27 years. The colonial government also facilitated the transfer of our prime tourist sites into tourist ownership, including taking possession of the geysers at Waka. It usurped our rights to act as kaitiaki over our geothermal and fresh waters, established the Rotorua Bathhouse, Māori Arts and Crafts Institute, and required a now penniless iwi to pay royalties to its tourist department to launch any services on our lakes, amongst a myriad of other thefts and instances of skullduggery. I just think that context might be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kiriopa. There appears to be no further discussion. We're going to put the motion. We have a mover and a seconder. I'll put the motion as on the screen there, point 2 and 3. I won't read them out. All those in favour, aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, councillors.
division. Yeah.
Sorry, we've had, for the purpose of process, we've called, had a division called. All those in favour, please raise your right hand, or left. This is for favour. Oh, sorry, and me.
I just need to work around the room, so leave your hands up.
Against?
Hang on.
Sorry, hang on. Oh, on screen. Councillor Wang here.
Councillor Kai Fong.
He's for. Councillor Kai Fong. For. Thank you. Against? Councillor Lee. And Councillor Barker abstained. Thank you, councillors.
I have to read those out. When there is a division, I do need to call out those that were for and those that were against. So those in favour, I have Councillor Kiriopa, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Brown, Mayor Tapsell, Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Patterson, and on video, Councillor Wang and Councillor Kai Fong. Those that voted against, Councillor Lee, and one abstention, which is Councillor Barker. The motion is carried.
Councillor Waru, coming back to the hot seat.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Okay, I think we'll go into the next one. So the next kaupapa, and after that we'll head off for a break. How's that? Kapai, this one looks pretty straightforward. So let's keep it straightforward, our wama. Kia ora tātou. So over to you again, Stephanie. And before we do though, sorry, got to get a mover and second to here we go. Here's the motion that the report titled Deliberations Proposed. Wrong one. That the report titled Proposed Reserve Revocation 10 Barnard Road be received. Can I please get a mover? Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Barker. All those in favour say aye. He whakahe, kao, carried, kua mana. So hand over to Steph. Once again. Amen.
Thank you. So this report is in relation to a small area of land that Council owns off Barnard Road. It is the square in purple. This land was vested in Council on subdivision of the bigger land parcel that it formed part of at the time, specifically to provide vehicle access through into the land to the north, which is outlined in red on the map in front of you. That land has in recent years been purchased by Somerset Retirement Villages, and they are currently progressing plans to develop a 270 unit retirement village on that land. They are doing that through a consenting the government's fast track process, which staff are currently supporting them with. So the land is held as a road reserve, so under the Reserves Act. And while the Reserves Act does give us options to vest it as public land, with the intention that the retirement village will be gated and therefore not provide public access, it won't align with public roading specifications. Somerset have also indicated their interest in purchasing this land. To enable that, we need to first revoke the status of the reserve through the public process that we undertake, and then seek to dispose of it directly to them. So the purpose of the report today is really to seek your approval to start that process.
Thank you, Steph. JP, are there any questions? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking up at the green space next to Urquhart Place, that triangular shape. Is that another reserve? So you've got where Barnard Road curves, and then there's Urquhart Place. There's a green space there that's triangular that actually connects to Barnard Road.
Yes, it is. And it's actually, there's a path through the middle which makes it look like a triangle, but it's actually a rectangle with a playground in the corner. That is a public
So
reserve.
that is a public reserve. So therefore that area has a reserve.
Yes, it does. And I should also make clear that the land that we're talking about today, 10 Barnard Road, is currently occupied and has done for some time by the motel adjacent. They use it for car parking under a licence to occupy. We have spoken with the motel. They're aware of what's going on and have always been aware that at some point in the future that land would be taken off them, essentially.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, Steve, I'll just ask for a point of clarification. Did you say it was 18 Barnard Road, or was it 10?
No, 10.
Kia ora, thank you. You did say 18. So I thought it was another number thing we had to sort out. Kate Pike, questions are still open for people to ask if they have any. There appears to be none. So could I go through, I'll ask Steph and JP to take their leave, I suppose, and Kate Pai. There's no other questions. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? That the council resolves to commence the process to revoke the road reserve status of the council-owned land at 10 Barnard Road, being lot 16 DPS 1375 pursuant to section 24 of the Reserves Act 1977. I have a mover, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Brown, seconded. All in favour say aye. Aye. If I got here, carried. Don't need a discussion. Okay, sorry about that. I'd cut the discussion out, but unless there's any pertinent kaupapa that people wish to say it. Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, look, I just want to acknowledge that this is a good example of where planning ahead is done really well. I think it would be absolutely fantastic. We're very excited to see a retirement village come to Rotorua, but also great that to access in and out of that retirement village will be through a safer way, as opposed to having to come in and out directly onto a very busy highway for the residents who will hopefully shortly be in there. So we have traffic light system there. We look forward to it being safe, but we also look forward to it being a new home for many of our elderly that also are seeking retirement villages or a lovely community for them to live in.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to obviously signal my support. I think it's important. Sadly, that end of Ferry Springs Road and around is, shall we say, amenable, unfortunately, to accidents on many occasions. I think it's very important for a development of that size and of that stature to have alternative transport routes in and out. So I fully support. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I tautoko my colleagues' comments. Our burgeoning elderly population hits 20% by 2030, and Rotorua is not really prepared for that. So this is a good step in the right direction of enabling more housing for our elderly.
Councillor Wang online. Sorry, anything? We'll go to Councillor Brown.
Everything what the other councillors have said, including the mayor, I think this is what you call a no-brainer.
That's why I went straight through. Are there any further comments to be made? I think it's pretty unanimous. I think which was reflected in the vote that we had earlier. But I suppose I'll just put forward that we reconfirm now. We've had the discussion that we all support the kaupapa. So I'll put that to the table, to the motion again. All in favour say aye. Aye. He whakahe, carried. Thank you very much. And I think this is a good opportune time for us to go into a break. So to those online, we'll be back very shortly. Kia ora. Wine. Kia ora no tātou kua hoki mai nei to our staff as well. We'll get into it. Before we do though, can I get a mover and a seconder please, that the report titled Progress Report Community and District Development Group be received. Councillor Brown, Councillor Patterson. I put that motion forward. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, carried. Ka pai. So, JP, I'll hand it over to you. And just before you start, I'll just let all the councillors know. So what we're going to do is that JP has a couple of presentations. After each presentation, I'll open up for questions. And then we'll move to the next presentation. We'll open up again for questions. Then we'll go to his report as he's presented in our agenda, our report. That will be taken as read. We'll open up for questions there. After that, be a round of discussion. Is that okay? Is that clear? Ka pai. JP, all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just the first one, and there's been a couple of questions around the housing dashboard and information that MSD and HUD, or HUD dashboard, Housing and Urban Development, is produced, and also some queries then about what our own Rotorua NZ highlights on their website. So I just thought I'd just take a bit of time to talk to the dashboard, which is available on the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development's website, and they produce these on a monthly basis. So with the first one we received was October of last year, and I just think it's kind of important because it touches on a number of issues that people have, and it is unfortunate, it's a bit hard to read up there on the screen, but if I just talk to it, I'll kind of direct you to some places to look for some information. So if you look up in the top left-hand corner, and it does come off the back of the Housing Accord. So there's a real focus here on the premises being used by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and the premises being used by MSD for emergency housing. So for people who are collecting the emergency housing grants. So that's the key focus. So if you look up in the top left-hand corner, you can see 25 is the number of motels being used directly by HUD and by MSD. And the number underneath that in brackets was the previous month. So just to sort of track some of the progress we've seen, and Her Worship has been talking about this with the progress of the Accord, if I go back to the first set of figures I have, which was September of last year, the number of motels that were being used by Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and MSD was 50. So that was September of last year, and previous to that, I think we've reported at its peak, it was something like over 62 motels were being used. So we have seen a rapid decrease. Clearly it's taken a while to get that movement happening, but the decrease in number of motels being used. So at the moment, the total there is 25. Now, if I then talk to the numbers that sit beside the 25, it is made up of the motels which are uncontracted that are being used by MSD. So MSD currently, as you look up there, has 10 motels which are uncontracted, where they have a relationship with that premise and they place people who are collecting the emergency housing SNG in those motels. September last year, that number was 34. So 34 has now come down to 10. So that's and then so that's the big focus of MSD. Now, a lot of those people which had been in those uncontracted motels obviously went into the contracted motels at that time, but overall the numbers are starting to come down. So the 10 that are still there are the ones that MSD is focusing on withdrawing from. Now, MSD has managers who have relationships with those motels, and one of the requirements out of the Accord was they talk to those moteliers to ensure that they do not have mixed use. So MSD regularly contacts and works with those motels to make sure that they are not advertising in the tourism space. So those 10 motels are the ones that are unconsented, uncontracted, but used and have a relationship with MSD. The next line is the 13 that went through the consenting process. These numbers are up to July, and of course we've been notified by Ministry of Housing and Urban Development that they've actually terminating the contracts with 2 of those. So next month, when you see the August figures, the 13 will drop down to 11. Okay. And then the 2 more ones are what they still see as their legacy contract relationship, which was one of, they called it the COVID motel, and one other one where they have a contract in place as transitional. So those 4 columns make up the 25 motels that are currently being used specifically by MSD and HUD to house people who are collecting the emergency housing SNG, so emergency housing motels. So the next column across, and if I just probably pick up my thing there, so within those 25 motels, and you saw the 4 categories of them there, is 315 households. And obviously a household can be a single person or a household can be a family, including children. So this month it's dropped from 327 to 315 that are housed within those motels by MSD and with the contract on HUD. Now, if I go back to the September figures I referred to before, there was 474 households that were being housed in that accommodation. So there's a good decrease of 150 households since September of last year. One of the questions that keeps coming up is where are the people coming from and where are they going to? So if you come into the table, and unfortunately you can't see this one on the screen, but this talks about those who are starting or ending within emergency housing on a monthly basis. So that's where they report about the ins and outs of those motels. If I looked at those 4 categories there, I'll probably look down on the sheet in front of me just to read what those are. It talks about who has started in emergency housing from Rotorua. So they were living in Rotorua for a period before moving into emergency housing. So that's one of the categories. That's the light blue, which is the mainstay of the bar that goes across there. There's a much darker line, which indicates people who have come from outside the district. So they've started within emergency housing in another region or another district and have come to Rotorua. So if when you see the actual table or you go and look at it, you'll see that's a very small line, and we're talking several people, if at all, in a particular month. So there has to be extremely clear reasons why they would be moving to our district to go into emergency housing here. So that's part of that discussion that through the Accord, the government gave an undertaking about not having people come to Rotorua. So that's that tracking of what's happened right back from September of last year. And then the yellow information below the line. So the yellow is where people have ended their stay within emergency housing within Rotorua. So they've come out of an emergency housing motel and they've gone somewhere else in Rotorua. And in some cases there is also a darker line to match those who have come into our district, that there is also some people who end their emergency housing stay by going to emergency housing in another district or region. So I would just say probably the best thing to do is find that sheet. I think we've got it loaded into your Stella, but the key here is probably just drill into it and have a look. So if again just refer to that area which goes to a lot of community concerns about people still coming in or suspicions that people still coming in, that's the information there that talks to where people have come from to go into emergency housing or where they've gone out of. So that's an important one. So overall motel numbers, number of households involved, and then obviously where people have started and finished their stays. The pie graphs you can see there start talking about the composition within each of those housing types, so across those 25 motels. And then equally down the bottom you get information around ethnicity across the two types. Now, one of the other things which I think is quite important goes to a couple of questions that councillors have been asking as well, is so where do people go to? So potentially they go into private tenancies or supported tenancies within private premises, but also they go into other public or community housing provider homes. So down in the bottom right-hand corner there, you can see the number of Kāinga Ora public homes. So currently it sits at a number of 1,006, which is up from the previous month, which I think was 1,004. And since September last year, there was 877. So the number of public homes that are available within our community for people needing housing has increased by 129 places. So 129 households have a place to go. As we've talked about previously, people come off the housing register, which is this number here, which has sort of started to decline, but pretty much has maintained itself. Now, everyone who's in emergency housing should be on the public housing register. And my understanding from MSD and Kāinga Ora, they have actively tried to ensure that it's the people who are currently within our motels that are given a level of priority into the new public homes that are built in our community. So they're still actively trying to make sure that the emphasis is on people in emergency housing into any public homes that are being built. If I just go along the bottom of that column on the bottom right-hand side there too, so that was the public homes available. There's also what's the transitional housing places. Now, this is often provided by groups like Visions, like Wera, and there's another number of other providers who are also making available public housing spaces through properties they own. So the number up there on the screen is 186. In September last year, it was 145. So there's been an increase of 41 homes being managed or provided for places for through CHIPS. Similarly, Housing First, which is another priority housing group, there's been an increase of 45 places in there. So again, it's community providers who are making available homes, and most importantly, those who are seen as being important on the register being housed is down to 6 from 36 back in September. So across this bottom bar, when you compare it to our October-September figures from last year, there's probably been an increase in available homes for people to move into of just over 210 odd properties. So have been made available. So that's when people ask those questions, where are people going from the decrease of about 150 households? Most will be finding their way into some form of public or social homes being provided either by Kāinga Ora or another provider. So I think the dashboards are really helpful for making sure all that information is really clear. Just in line with what has been presented, clearly, HUD, on behalf with MSD, circulate this on a monthly basis, and it's fed into the Housing Accord steering groups, but it's also posted on their websites, so people can go ahead and see it. One of the concerns people have said is, look, why is this information different from what Rotorua NZ, for example, registers? Now, for the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and MSD, their focus is on what premises do they actively use. So they are actively using these 25 premises and have a management relationship or relationship with those properties. When a property is exited, obviously we've got our inspections that we go through, and we'll go and see these motels and say, you've now left the MSD or the contracted space, you should be returning to tourism. And we inspect them, and generally they're telling us that they are renovating or reopening as tourism facilities. So we inspect them, we give them letters, and we advise them that if they want to do anything else, they need a resource consent or a change of use. So that's the process we go through. At that point, our compliance team has kind of finished their job unless we get a complaint or we see something different happening. So for Rotorua NZ, before they update their website, they do not take this information and instantly update their website. Their concern is that whilst we might have completed our inspections and an operator or a motelier may have indicated what they're doing to us, there's not a guarantee that's happened. So whilst MSD and HUD have finished working with that particular motel or being involved in that motel, there is a risk that that operator may consider tenancies or some other form of accommodation which is outside of the emergency housing space. Now for Rotorua NZ, they do not want to take our information and instantly update their website because they might be providing false information to visitors to our city who may then go to one of those motels seeking accommodation and finding that it has pivoted and is now taking on tenancies, potentially illegal tenancies. So they do not want to be caught in that situation. So Rotorua NZ does not take this monthly report and update their website. They wait. So they make contact with the motels 1, 2, 3 months later to see what's happening. They also do their own monitoring of booking information to see what is happening, to make sure that motel has actually returned to the tourism sector before they update their website. So they are taking a very conservative view of the motels that might have been involved in emergency housing and are meant to have returned to tourism. They take their time to update their website. So hence, there's been questions in the community about why is the information different. This is the point in time that MSD is using it or exit it. Rotorua NZ waits to see whether they go off and start doing tenancies or some other activity and before they update their website. So different points in time. So hopefully that's a bit of clarification about people who might be looking at the Rotorua NZ website and wondering why it's different from the dashboards that we're providing. So there is a lot of information in there, and I think it's a really useful information, and it's a good way for certainly the steering groups around the Accord to track change over time, but also to understand the pipeline of public and social homes being built across the city. So happy to answer off any questions on that, but I just thought I'd take my time going through that for you.
Thank you, JP. And with that, yep, I'll open it up for questions and or points of clarification. So, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. JP, I have no questions, but that brilliantly answers all of the questions that the community have been throwing at me, so I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, JP. Great presentation, and yeah, I agree with what Councillor Lee has to say, but a couple of things for me. A cynical person might think we're reporting families versus singles because it sounds, you know, if we get harsh on this, oh, we can't chuck families onto the street, which we don't want to do, obviously, but what's the purpose of calling singles families? Do we know? And I've got another question. I think I recall seeing in a report from one of our good residents that we've got 3 motels offering mixed use, roughly. I can check on that, but what is your department doing to stamp on that particular practice?
I think you're right. The reporting there in the top 2 bars talks to households. If you look at the pie graph below, you actually get the real numbers of the number of adults and the number of children in the different accommodation types. So you're right, some of those adults might be couples or they're single individuals, but if you want to see the real number of people, it's in the pie graphs below the household reporting. So as I say, there's quite a bit of information there. And equally in the pie graph, it talks single without children, single with children, couple without children, and couple with children. So those are the sort of the parts of those different pie segments to give you that extra level of detail. You're right, picks it up, gives you more granularity behind what's counted as a household. Just on the compliance information, so we're really confident that MSD has communicated to us that they have regular meetings with their uncontracted 10 and that there should not be any mixed use in that space. Equally, the consented and emergency housing places, these 25, should all be not mixed use. The concern you raise about motels who are attempting to have a few tenancies still advertising for tourists is a problem, and this is why Rotorua NZ has been particularly conservative about making that transition. So between ourselves and monitoring their occupancy data or their booking availability data, and where communities raised it with us, we are inspecting some of those premises. We're also joining up now more so with MB's tenancy services, because sometimes we're starting to see people waving around tenancy agreements as legitimate tenancies within some of these premises, which clearly they may be a tenancy agreement, but bonds aren't being submitted to the tenancy services, and nor are many of these premises meeting their healthy homes requirements. Again, having a tenancy in a motel room is not appropriate. So we've been joining up and doing joint inspections with those. And one particular property, we've both jointly issued notices and abatement notices from both tenancy services. So we're now joining up our regulatory actions to start finding and providing information specifically on those premises. So we're systematically working our way through those as they come out of this list to make sure we don't see that pivot or just going back to something that it should not be doing. So yeah, working more closely, I think, with tenancy services has been a real benefit of the last few months.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your very in-depth description of this information. Just one thing I can't see, where are the backpackers included in here?
So again, the accommodation types that are listed here, I can't remember if any of the ones that are being used by, I think there's a couple that are being used by MSD within that 10. Probably the most, there has been one that's just been exited now. Number 11, when it dropped to 10, was an exiting from a backpacker. The majority of the backpackers are acting in this space as boarding houses. And so we're actually having a very specific conversation across the agencies about now how do we approach the dozen or so backpackers in our town. There's about 10 across the city, and certainly at least 2 in the residential area. So we're actually forming a bit of a plan to specifically talk to them, so they're not part of this set of figures. Maybe one of them is all that's left.
So there's still some outside this.
Yeah, and this is what we're talking about, that pivot. So they are the backpackers, while we've still not come back to our full tourism numbers, are taking the opportunity to provide transitional accommodation, and in some cases offering tenancies, and so that's where we've now got to focus on. So those dozen or so are currently in the planning phase for us to start making approaches to them collectively.
Excellent. And the other, just a second question, with regards to the public houses, are you aware at all of private landlords who've contracted their homes to providers on the basis that they will be having MHUD or KO tenants put into them, or at least funded by the government? Is there any way that we can monitor that they are in fact taking people from the motels and not just random people imported from out of town without our knowing?
That's a harder space. I think one of the things that we've got in town, so a private landlord who may have a relationship with a community housing provider is generally those numbers of transitional homes. So yes, they are. So that's a relationship where the provider looks to the housing register probably works back through the hub about who needs accommodation. So they are generally drawing on tenants from our local supply and emergency housing accommodation. But I'm not sure about whether we're seeing any direct import of people and stuff, and that's outside what we can see. So if it's Wera or a range of other providers, and there is a number of them, where they're actually pulling people off the housing register or providing accommodation, is something that between them and MSD.
So this is a fairly high trust model then, and there's no way we can actually be sure what they're telling us is true.
Look, my understanding from MSD, just like they're now managing or trying to make sure people aren't coming to town without an absolute clear reason, I think the same attitude applies from MSD into the providers. So I can't imagine they would be supporting a provider who says, hey, I've got someone in another city who wants to come and stay in my accommodation and I'll just pick them up. I think actually the focus from MSD is about our local issues.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien, followed by Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through the Chair, thank you for your analysis, JP. Could I ask you please, so if I'm reading the data correctly, the people coming from outside Rotorua now is fairly small, looking at the figures presented. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Very small.
So can I ask you, how does that match when for example, Mike Bryant has previously told the previous council that we can't actually stop people from coming to Rotorua if they want to? Now, I'm very aware of what it states in the Accord. So how do those two things match up when on one hand they say there's a policy that we can't stop people coming in when the numbers were much higher? I appreciate there's definitely been an improvement if this is correct. How do we match those two things up when on one hand they say we're not bringing them in? Clearly there is still some, albeit a massive improvement. How do those two match up?
I think the key here is the bringing to town discussion. I don't believe when Mike was presenting and we were talking about the accommodation, he was talking about the region of the MSD region. So if there was a shortage of accommodation in Kawarau, for example, they would place someone here. So that was MSD working with MSD. My understanding is they're not suggesting or moving people to other locations into district as an option for accommodation. So they're not doing it themselves. Potentially what you're seeing there on those very small numbers, which is almost like a line of ones and twos, is people who are getting here under their own steam and presenting at a local office saying they need accommodation. And my understanding from the way the hub is operated, they're inquiring as to why they're here and not where they've come from. So there is actually people being sent back to where they came from if they've got here under their own steam. But if there's legitimate reasons and there's an absolute need for accommodation, MSD will not leave them without accommodation.
Okay, thank you. And could I ask, is there any data available to us to see what of the tenants are receiving wraparound services? Because I know for a lot of people, there will be concern that yes, we're taking them out of the motels, which is great, but if they're just going into a house somewhere, whether it be a brand new or existing home, and they still have existing either mental health or family or social issues, if they're not getting that help, we're not really fixing a problem, are we?
You've raised an issue that has been particularly important to the Ngāti Whakaui and the Te Arawa reps who have been involved in the Housing Accord, which is that support services. Clearly on the 13 motels, which is the contracted ones, there is directly available services and support provided to the people in those motels. That was part of the consenting arrangements. If people are being supported by a community housing provider, generally they're getting support. The lack of support of an individual tenant simply going into a home is also an issue that's been raised with groups like Te Whata Ora, who also have to make sure we've got adequate support services and outreach support services. So there is a recognition that in some cases there is a gap, but certainly it's an issue that's been raised within the work streams of the Accord group, that those need to be identified, and if there's more services required for a portion of those people who aren't receiving them, that's an area that needs further development. But in many cases, a substantial number of the people within this space are receiving support services.
Fully accept it. If I may Mr. Chair. Fully accept that, but what I'm asking, and I think for many of the people that contact me, if we don't have data around that, we're saying, oh, the people in motels are receiving social help. But are they? Because where a lot of these motels are concentrated, there seems to be a very direct increase in antisocial and criminal behaviour. So I would take a point of difference there, and it also concerns me that after almost a year, I would have thought that perhaps identifying some of those work streams where there are gaps would be in the benefit of the people of Rotorua, and I'm concerned that the Housing Accord does not at this moment seem to address those or provide us with data about how we're going to fix those issues. But
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and maybe it's a case of us providing at a subsequent meeting, get some of those providers to come along and talk about the wraparound services that are being provided and the impacts they are having. So maybe that's a way of alleviating some of that. I can't answer those questions, but certainly some of those service providers could.
And finally, just one quick question. Could I ask how many infringements or abatements have we issued to any of those not complying with either the resource consents or with the previous Commissioner panel? Thank you.
Again, we've talked about, we had begun legal undertakings with 9, which approximately a year ago. They met the conditions of engaging with consultants, so they've stayed in that process where they're continuing to receive letters. We're seeing several of them continuing to talk with us, so it's taking a long time for them to work through some of their consent discussions with us. At the moment, off the top of my head, I think we've issued abatement notices on 3 properties and fined 3 properties. So we've gone through to that stage on 3, but as I say, we've got a number that are still in the pipeline, and now we've aligned ourselves with the tenancy services. They've got more flexibility to issue fines and abatements than we do.
Thank you. It seems Councillor Barker has said she's okay now to ask. So I just have a quick question before we move on, JP, very quickly. In the part, a bit hard to see, I think it says start/end of spell location.
Yep, over.
Right under the July, or in the July part.
Yep.
How am I to interpret that?
You can see there. I don't think on that month there is any yellow bar below it. So for July, which is this report, there was a number of people that entered emergency housing. So I think if you look across at the bar, it looks like it's less than 10. So less than 10 people entered emergency housing. No one exited for July. But if you look back previous 3 months, more people have exited than have come in. So yellow is a minus, the blue above is a plus to the numbers.
Thank you for that clarification. It appears we have no other questions or points of clarification for this presentation. I'll ask you to move to the next one, which is the community safety.
Yeah, thank you. So just as part of the overall progress report, we just wanted to do a update of the actions we've got underway now against the Community Safety Action Plan. So I'm just going to invite Mihi and Julie May up to join me on this. So we're just going to tag team across this. I might go to the cheap seat. So I just might...
Julie May, mihi te nā kōrua, e mai haere mai ki tā tātou hui. I'll hand it over to you guys. Ngāmi.
Thank you. So we just kind of wanted to make sure we talked about sort of an integrated approach off the action plan that has been developed over the last few months. So I just thought I'd step it through and before Julie May and Mihi to sort of dive into the specifics of what's being proposed to be implemented over the next couple of months. So I'll probably refer back to some of the key targets and objectives you'd set. So against your 4 priority areas under the community area, you'd identified community safety, and a community safety plan has been really important. Obviously, they got translated specifically down into some objectives for this financial year. And obviously part of that was to put in place a community safety strategy in partnership with all these groups, all the key groups, by August of 2023. So we're kind of a little bit outside of that, but the action plan had been in place from several of the workshops done previously. The other part of it was also to look to government and to partners to try and seek some resourcing and some investment that recognises this is not necessarily our job. We're stepping into a gap here to address some significant issues for our community, to try and leverage some additional investment from other parties. So we'll touch on that as we go through this presentation as well. So the development of this this plan has been reasonably protracted, and Mihi and the team have been involved in some quite significant and long discussions with some of these key partners, obviously the police being the main one in this space. But we'll touch on it later on. There's also involvement of groups like the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, who also has some specific services they're concerned about as well. And obviously you've received some workshops and a number of presentations previously trying to outline a sort of a direction of travel in putting together an action plan. I think the really important thing we need to talk about in this space is, whilst we're giving you a number of individual initiatives and proposals, there is no single answer here, no single magic bullet that has the complete result that we're after, which is to dramatically reduce crime and crime victimisation across our city or our communities. And obviously police are central to that as well, so really important that we work closely with them. So really our focus has been looking back at what's been done over the previous 2 financial years. We have spent a lot of resourcing in the private space with security guards, with reliance on our cameras usually after the fact, and also the focus and the changing focus of our community guardians as well. So there's a number of reflections and learnings we've taken from the previous 2 years as well to really get a focus on what is the best value for us to start seeing some improvements in community safety. The critical piece, and the team will touch on it as they dive into these in more detail, is that we've got to constantly keep all of these ideas and initiatives under review. We need to be nimble, we need to be talking to those partners, and we need to be adapting if something isn't working. So we need to just remain flexible. Obviously the focus here is to get all of these actions we're about to talk to you about in place by December as we go into the summer. But again, we'll be looking to bring some additional stuff that may have impacts into the first year of the LTP and any subsequent years as we build up the LTP discussions towards December as well. So that community action plan that you have seen, so it's the one-pager, which talked to a number of key objectives. I won't go through those in any detail, but they were presented to you about the key there is, refreshed model for the guardians, making sure we get good governance oversight and integration with partners, and get that visibility of change and the importance of change in our community, and also making sure that we get good integrated approaches. And the last part there, work with partners and work with all of government to make sure that we're leveraging resources where we need it. So that one pager also picked up on some of these key actions. So I think we've just got them in bold here. So those key objectives around governance. So Her Worship the Mayor is now putting in place regular meetings with the Rotorua Area Commander. So really important discussions there, but also talking directly to the Minister of Police about resourcing levels and the focus for our community. So that's got to be our cornerstone of our efforts, that this is a police responsibility and a government responsibility. So we just need to make sure we have that direct dialogue and that engagement around what we're having to do to work around that focus. We've talked about a sort of a visual change and a base that gives all the partners an opportunity to come together. So that's we'll talk a bit more about the Inner City Community Hub. Her Worship's already talked about that in the media. So we'll go through a bit more detail about what that might look like and where it will be located as we go through this. We're doing a bit of a change in the focus of our guardians. So again, testing some different approach and some different behaviours, and so that's really important. And as far as environmental work is concerned, I think there's a media release just going out tomorrow about work we've been doing with the main supermarkets and suppliers of trolleys, just so we get an 0800 numbers and we can start working on that visual appearance. But we also need to do some work with Infracore about those visual impacts of poor behaviour or poor maintenance across our city. And then finally, Mihi particularly will talk about the deployment and the integration between our guardians, about private security, with the police and the use of CCTV to coordinate our activity and our focus to be successful. So that's really the focus of this presentation, is really to go through how those pieces fit together initially and as our immediate areas of focus. So if I just conclude before the team dives into the detail here, just acknowledging Her Worship for the governance meetings and the regular meetings now, even about the specific incidents and debriefs where we've had problems or incidents in the city with the police and the key partners, but also the reaching out to government to identify our level of crime, the challenges being created by deprivation and poverty in our community, and obviously the repercussions of emergency housing in areas of our city, and the need for police support. So for us now, the rest of the presentation, it just really goes into talking about that Inner City Hub, its focus, the role of security guards and an RFP process, and also then CCTV monitoring and our relationship around the bus stops with the Regional Council and the joined up deployment model. So I'll conclude at that point and just hand on to Julie May initially. Sorry.
Morena koutou. Thank you very much. As JP has pointed out, we're going to be going through a whole series of initiatives, and what's important to note is that not one of these suite of initiatives can stand alone, and that it is actually this collective approach that is actually necessary to improve the safety in our inner city and in Rotorua. So I'm going to be dealing specifically with the Inner City Community Hub, the objectives of which is to provide a central hub that would offer customer services, crime prevention and activations in line with the inner city revitalisation objectives. So this initiative doesn't sit outside of what we're trying to do as a broader revitalisation of the inner city. We're also looking at improving our visibility of the police, our safe city guardians and our Maori wardens. And we want to improve the safety and decrease the antisocial behaviour and criminal activity occurring in the city. We want to build confidence in inner city safety by having a central presence, and we want to increase engagement to ensure community is kept up to date with what's happening in the inner city and elsewhere in Rotorua. So who will be located in the Inner City Community Hub? It's going to be our Safe City Guardians, the CBD Police and Crime Prevention, the Inner City Operations Manager and Community Support Officer, Maori Wardens and Neighbourhood Support Volunteers. When we're looking at the location for this, obviously Titanikai Street being a key spine in our inner city and area of focus, we looked at 3 options within the Titanikai Street area. And of that, 116 Hinamoa Street, which is on the corner of Titanikai Street, right where Te Manawa Square is, was the best option both in terms of visibility, cost, and as well as availability. We've signed a 2-year lease with the right to renew on that space. And in terms of our hours of operation, we'll be looking at 5 days a week to start with, from 8 to 5, so covering those retail hours, as well as on Saturdays from 8 to 1. And then we're looking at possible extended hours in the summer and over certain months. So just for people's clarity in terms of the space, on the map there you can see the different options, 1, 2 and 3. Option 1 being, just for those people familiar with the buildings, we're going to be just in the building next to Starbucks. Now, it seems like it's around the corner, but it's actually got great visibility over to Manama Square and to Tanakai Street. So it does offer us that. And as I said, it has the best in terms of cost and availability as well. And I'll then hand over to me.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. I'm going to focus on our Safe City Guardians and the review that's...
Sorry, mate, can you move your mic to your... Yeah, there you go. Kia ora.
So I'm going to focus on the Safe City Guardians and the review that's currently underway. So our current operations, since August 2023, we have six Safe City Guardians working 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Prior to August 2023, we had 4 Safe City Guardians with Watchdog contracted to enable coverage. Our Safe City Guardians role, in essence, they are approachable, visible, they're a visible presence in the CBD. They attend incidents and act as a conduit when required. So they distribute community information and communication about general council updates. They report vandalism or damage of council property. They assist vulnerable people, and they also make referrals for our vulnerable people to the appropriate support services. They de-escalate antisocial behaviour. They assist police with crowd support and control when required, and they report illegal activity to police, and they collect and provide information from the community for council consideration. We are having current issues with what our why behind the Safe City Guardians and the what with Safe City Guardians. So our current issues are the appearance is similar to security contractors, which actually blurs the lines between services. There's a current misunderstanding of the roles amongst business owners in the CBD, and Safe City Guardians are not recognised for their crime prevention and community support work. So our proposed solutions are we review the roles and responsibilities of Safe City Guardians. We actually have a panel that has the Area Commander of Police, the Regional Māori Wardens Manager and myself to review the roles and responsibilities. We propose 2 additional Safe City Guardians to enable coverage, 7 days, 8 a.m. to midnight. We would like to train our Safe City Guardians for crime prevention through environmental design. We're going to ensure our Safe City Guardians are warranted to uphold bylaws and increase versatility, and public education campaign about Safe City Guardian role, and have an immediate refresh of the Safe City Guardian uniform. I'm also going to speak to you about our mobile security patrol response vehicle that is contracted and an RFP process is underway. So mobile security patrol is the most efficient for coverage of the full breadth of the CBD and Fenton Street. They are visible and support our Safe City Guardians, Māori Wardens and police and CCTV deployment. So our objectives are to increase visibility, responsiveness and reassurance throughout the CBD and Fenton Street. Also to align coverage to support key partners to enhance safety. So our current operations, and this is an interim contract with VR. So VR Security are contracted, the contract has been extended to modify and align with the community safety strategy. They provide a mobile response to the CBD and Fenton Street. There is 1 vehicle with 2 persons for 2 shifts, starting at 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and then there's a swap over shift from 4 p.m. to midnight. So VR Security will be warranted authorised officers and able to enforce certain bylaws. VR enter reports directly into One Council. So an RFP is to go out by November and will include additional coverage of Thursday, Friday and Saturday for those mobile patrols. Our CCTV strategy review and monitoring increase. So as we know, CCTV internationally is recognised as the most effective crime prevention tool. However, it is only effective if you have trained people monitoring and you have enough people actively monitoring the CCTV systems. So our objectives, we want consistent observation of CCTV network to enhance crime prevention and response to incidents. We want to maximise coverage times to support community safety, particularly after dark and at hospitality closing times. We want to maximise positive outcomes through increased active monitoring, and we want to support partner deployment to areas and incidents of interest with urgency. Our current operations, we have 4 operators monitoring our CCTV 7 days a week from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. That's Monday, Wednesday and Sundays. And we have an extension to midnight, Thursdays, Fridays and Saturday nights, which are our high demand times. So we have approximately 300 CCTV cameras, but insufficient resources to actively monitor the entire network. Our operators apply a preventative approach for suspicious activity, as well as alerting police for crimes in progress. They also complete frequent reviews to assist police in their investigations. So our CCTV strategy review is we're proposing recruitment of additional staff to ensure active monitoring and reviewing of CCTV, increase monitoring coverage that aligns with the Safe City Guardians and contracted mobile security rosters, provide enhanced support to police, and strengthening deployment model to effectively target hot locations, known offenders and vulnerable victims. We're going to do a phased approach with this. So in phase 1, we're looking at increasing our CCTV operators by 3 more. This will give us a chance to increase our CC coverage to 7 days from 8 a.m. to midnight, Sunday to Thursday, and 8 a.m. to 4 a.m. Friday to Saturday, aligning with mobile contracted security hours. Phase 2 is to reassess and examine additional partnership options with other councils. For example, we have had interest from Taupo that are looking at the way we operate here, and they've been in contact with us. I'm going to talk to you about the bus stops and bus route safety. So we have secured funding from Bay of Plenty Regional Council for $86,000 over the next 10 years, so $86,000 per year. So what they want us to do is to ensure safety at bus stops and on bus routes with that funding. So we also want to secure community funding to boost capacity and capability for Māori wardens. It's been proposed that recruitment of a team leader to manage safety on buses and around bus stops, and that Māori wardens, Safe City Guardians, contracted security mobile patrols and CCTV work collectively to ensure safety at bus stops and on bus routes, increasing visibility and prevention of antisocial behaviour and violence.
Just concluding there, you'll just see there our reliance on making sure that there's good camera coverage. That's a critical set of eyes for us across the city and the community, so really important for us. Our Safe City Guardians will be there visibly walking the streets and engaging with members of the public, talking to our retailers and having that face-to-face and looking to de-escalate situations as much as they can. We've tried to go for a more efficient focus around the direct security services. So direct security services will be mobile. and they will be focused on the CBD and Fenton Street, and it gives us the chance again to respond to some of the community concerns in Glenholm. That patrol vehicle can head down Holland Street and a number of those other streets within Glenholm as they start doing those laps of the CBD and that wider Fenton Street area. They'll be immediately available to be deployed if there's an incident or they need to go and investigate something that may have been seen by the CCTV crew, and equally now with the hub and the integrated model of working closely with both Māori wardens, hopefully with the retailers as we reach out from the hub, and the police, will get an extremely well integrated service for safety. The key here, and I said it at the start, is we'll constantly keep this under review, so we'll reflect on any incidents and any learnings we can take forward, but it's certainly the proposal that we're putting forward now to build into our service delivery in the next couple of months.
Thank you, JP. Chili mai mihi. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou. Hoi anō, ka tūwhera kia tātou ki te tukupātai, so I'll open up for questions, but I'm mindful of the time. So if you do ask questions, councillors, can you keep them quite succinct and direct so we can move through the agenda. Kia ora. Councillor Patterson, followed by Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your report. Very in-depth and some good stuff in there. Just had 3 questions. Just clarification. Firstly, when it says warranted to uphold bylaws, there were 2 times that was mentioned. What does that actually mean?
It gives the VR, well, currently VR mobile security and Safe City Guardians, it gives them delegated authority to be able to enforce some of our bylaws, i.e. the liquor ban, if they can deal with it themselves and issue an infringement notice, then relying on the police to arrive to deal with that matter.
So if that escalates, then they'd involve the police?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. And just carrying on from that, those staff members, sometimes I've seen people that you wouldn't really think would be a security guard acting in that role. Have we got any oversight to make sure that the people who are put into those positions who are not our Safe City Guardians but other officers actually are up to the job?
Yes, absolutely. So those with our Safe City Guardians, they are effectively trained with de-escalation training, which is really important because their job is to de-escalate, and it's not to jump in and it's to stay in their lane. There's a role for the police and there's a role for our City Guardians.
Right, so there is a line between the two.
Yes.
And last question, on to the CCTV. Have you given any thought or done any work on incorporating AI to support your performance as far as being able to monitor incidents that currently human eyes can only see so many screens, but AI can cover a hell of a lot more? Any work done on that?
Absolutely. Look, there is discussions being had with our IT team around that, and albeit brief at the moment, but there is a plan going ahead. And in the early stages, yes, AI is, something we're considering.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien, followed by Te Manukura.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you. Thank you all for your presentation, all 3 of you. Could I ask, since Māori Wardens are, from what I believe, empowered by the Māori Community Development Act, how many Māori Wardens are there approximately if we start this tomorrow? How many do we have, and how many would we look to recruit, and roughly what's the time period for that, given there are legalities involved?
Yeah, currently the Māori Wardens have 15 volunteers that are actively working. I believe they have around 35, but 15, 35, and they have 15 that are currently actively working. With the Māori Wardens, we are going to have to be flexible. They are a volunteer organisation with their hours. Also with the Māori Wardens, the proposal around having a team leader to coordinate is really a key here, because they need to coordinate those bus routes, they need to coordinate the bus stops, and they need to coordinate our how many staff we've got to be able to do that. So that's key around the coordination piece with Māori wardens, working together with City Guardians and our other key partners, so we can provide that coverage.
Thank you. Could I ask JP's predecessor, we'd asked previously around data around homeless, how many homeless are picked up by council or assisted, and how we refer them to. Sorry, and not nitpicking, but there isn't any data again this month, but I appreciate, JP, it's only fairly new to your role. Is that something we could identify for the future, please?
I'll look across at me. I think one of the purposes which we thought was really important was to make sure that the City Guardians are engaging with the homeless as we see them and find them in different parts of the city or in the parks, and so that making sure there is an awareness of it. So I think that's something we can definitely report back on, is what are those numbers currently, and where have those issues arisen. A couple of weeks ago, certainly one of our City Guardians contacted me and with the police where they were seeking to trespass someone off one of our reserves. So there is some information we should be able to bring back to you in the future.
Thank you, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, just to add on to that, our City Guardians keep a spreadsheet of who they speak to that are homeless, and they're working with our Thriving Communities team in making referrals and getting those right support services in place.
Thank you, and I'm sure that is, but it would just be helpful to our council if we could have that. And finally, could I just ask around begging? I'm very concerned because I think some of the behaviour by some of the beggars is almost an accident waiting to happen either to themselves or to others. Can I ask what's our action plan on that?
We've been working together with the police and Safe City Guardians and gathering the intel around who's doing it, why they're doing it. We have got a database on that, and that will be there'll be further planning around that and moving forward around that with what data we've generated.
I think there's a key piece here too, which is as we start getting that base and making contact with retailers, you know, obviously they're the ones who sometimes experience it right outside their premise, or it's impacting them directly. You know, they're the ones who need to let us know so that contact can be made. And if there's threatening behaviour, then we're starting to get some grounds then to make sure that it can be addressed. So I think that's part of the next phase, is to make sure that information is built on and we can actually take some action around those.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to acknowledge and thank Her Worship for the stuff that she shared with her fellow councillors about all the steps she's trying to make with central government. I'd just like to say that, you know, previous councils have made a big thing about us receiving $75 million for infrastructure spending, but no one's talking about the lack of investment that we need in our social infrastructure. And it's very hard because, you know, with ratepayers trying to cope with a very small pool of problems that need, you know, several aquatic centres, we're probably doing the best we can, but we really need some help really need a Rotorua solution from central government. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Message received. Te marukura, kai ako te wā.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. And can I just really thank the team for the hard work and the urgency that they've put into presenting this safety plan initiatives, but actually all of the things that you do business as usual behind the scene. It's always appreciated. And as Councillor O'Brien has mentioned, community safety is a real priority for us. It is one of the top priorities for this council, so we look forward to supporting. My questions actually lead on from Councillor O'Brien's around the Māori wardens. So how quickly can we set up and support them to assist at our bus stops? We know that this has been one of the areas of particular concern. I do acknowledge your proposal to support a team leader. I definitely support that. But how quickly are we able to get them in there? And then second question, with the establishment of the Community Safety Hub, understanding they are largely volunteers with very little funding, are we able to also support as a base for Māori wardens within this Community Safety Hub?
There's another piece there which we touched on. Obviously, we had the regional council funding, but we're also going through seeking through our own funding rounds to support the Māori wardens. So we're currently out with our neighbourhood matching funds, and the prioritisation around safety initiatives has been pretty clear. So we're talking directly to the Māori wardens about their sustainability going forward. How do they support their those volunteers, their numbers, their recruitment, and obviously also the place to base themselves, which is also another critical part. So we'll certainly be encouraging them to use the hub as a base in that space. So that's critical. I think the next pass I'll hand on to Mihi to answer.
I've been in conversation with the regional manager of Māori Wardens very recently, and she's already approached the bus managers and spoken with them. They're already having presence along to Tanakai Street. To the, so we can only build on this and make it better, but they're already working on it.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this report. I have been a wee bit sceptical as to what's been happening in this space, and this actually sounds really encouraging, and I think a lot of people will be pleased to hear this. I'm interested in the uniforms that you're contemplating with the Māori Wardens. How would they be different from the Māori Wardens for the Safe City Guardians and also security?
Yeah, we're looking at more of a ambassadorial look for our Safe City Guardians. So what that will mean, we'll pull up a slide. So it will be a very professional look, an approachable look, but you know, no stab-proof vest, no recording device, just an approachable, safe, visible presence.
Okay, thank you.
There appears to be no more questions. Oh, sorry. Councillor Kiriopa, followed by Councillor Patterson. Oh, Councillor Brown, sorry.
Kia ora, thank you for an in-depth report. I just want to highlight that again, from the start, the plan is partnering with police and government agencies, and I still feel that there is a huge gap where we're not actually partnering with our community. The only community engagement that I could see in that was with inner city business, and there are a whole lot of social services providers within the Rotorua Central City that we're not partnering with, and I still don't understand that there are community groups such as the community hubs that we should be engaging with on this if we're serious about community safety. If you want to respond to that, I've got some other questions.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you, but I think we just have to do the first approach, where the priority lies. We need to do a phased approach and build on what we've got and make it better. So I agree with you.
Thanks, and I agree with you that there needs to be a phased approach. I know we've had numerous discussions as councillors that obviously the priority right now is the CBD, but we have a whole lot of issues in the suburbs that need to extend on from this, so I look forward to future presentations highlighting where we might be headed with that. I did want to just touch on with them in terms of the Māori Wardens, just highlighting that Māori Wardens weren't actually set up to be voluntary. They're only voluntary because there's never been any resourcing allocated to them, and I'm happy to hear that you're looking towards some funds that might be available to help resource Māori Wardens, because I wouldn't want us to be taking advantage of the fact that they have been voluntary up to this point, and the fact that 70% of the people, has been highlighted in the previous presentation, of the people living in emergency housing are Māori. This is an opportunity to partner with Māori through the Māori Wardens to help work on this issue. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you.
Was there a question in that, Councillor Kiriopa, sorry? Or are you finished?
I'm finished. I thought I did answer a question. Maybe I just commented. Sorry.
That's fine. Kia ora. Councillor Brown.
Kia ora whānau. Couple of quick questions. In your report, you talk about rebranding council vehicles. That makes me nervous. I wonder if you could expand on that a little. And could you talk a little bit about graffiti? I've been watching some around the Margarita Street area that doesn't seem to be getting dealt with. What's the expectation? Are we proactive, reactive? Is there a goal on getting it down?
The branding question has just been put on hold for further discussion later on. So I think your concerns are legitimate if we start sort of over-emphasising this. We've got the mobile security vehicle provided by one contractor at the moment, but that'll be a part of the RFP process. So that's our rapid response piece with a very clear security focus. I think you've heard the comment there about sort of changing the view of our guardians themselves and how they operate within the city as being eyes, ears, coordinators, de-escalations, awareness and communication, and making sure we've got all that stuff effectively. So I think the branding question is one we will come back to later, but again, we didn't see it as necessary at this stage. We'll have a further conversation if we think it's valid.
And graffiti?
Graffiti. Look, graffiti goes to a couple of issues, and I raised it in our LTP workshop. Appearance of the inner city in general, so maintenance, making sure we address it quickly. I've just been talking this morning actually with Infracore, who obviously provide some of that service, about being more rapid in their responses, and us not to do the duck shoving between different agencies. So we just get in there and do something about it, because if we get one lot of graffiti, it'll attract some more. So we're trying to get more proactively on top of that. The issue I was talking about was graffiti that appeared within a state highway environment. If we wait for Wakakutahi to respond, it could be some time, and again, it's a really terrible look for our community. So Infracore now is trying their best to be more responsive, and as I say, with more eyes and ears out there, looking and checking, hopefully we can get on top of it.
Thank you. We'll take one last question. Sorry, Councillor Patterson. I'm going to go to Councillor Maxwell. Kia ora. Just mindful of the time, e homa.
Hi. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Just one quick short question. One is CCTV. Is it being utilised in situations like we've had recently, Rotorua Street bus stop library? Are they being utilised?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, there's been some issues arising down at our JB Square, down at the Aroa bus stop. Our CCTV have been integral in holding people to account as a result of the offending that's taken place down there. And that's assisting police with corroborating evidence, identifying who's responsible. So absolutely.
Ka-pai.
Thank you. I think we'll cut it there for the presentation. Thank you very much, Julie May. Thank you very much, me. If there are other questions, councillors, I think just approach JP, and maybe he can help you find out what those answers may be to your questions. Nā reira, kai te mihi atu kia kōrua. Kia ora. We'll move straight on to your...
Yes, so look, I'll take the rest of my report as read. There was a couple of things I just wanted to emphasise, and I'll just open my laptop so I can pull them up on screen. You can see there on page 34, we're starting to see that adverse impact of economic conditions, interest rates, and building sort of slowing slightly there. So we had an extremely good year last year on consented lots. Now a lot of that goes to Wharenui and also Freedom Villages, which gave us some really significant figures. So that's the orange line. So our blue line is still significantly higher than previous years, but we've started to see that impact of the economic climate. The next slide down shows we dipped just towards the year end then on building consents being issued. So 347 last year, 326 this year. There was a question I received from a councillor at the LTP workshop about Kāinga Ōra's developments. So I think I indicated that there'd been something like 130 homes had been added to the buildings, sort of public home supply, which was previous year's building consents, obviously coming through and adding to that public housing stock, lifting it from about 887 through to 1,006. This year, outside of our figures, there's been approximately 75 consents processed for Kāinga Ōra by their own consentium. So remember, we don't process their building consents, they do them themselves. So they've processed 75 consents of their own. What I can't see in here is the developments that might have been private developments who may on-sell a premise or have a relationship with Kāinga Ōra. So we can't unpack that. There is some more that would be on top of that. So I suppose when you start looking at building consents for the city, there has been approximately 400 during this financial year up until the end of July, or up to the end of June, I should say. 326 processed by us and 75 separately by Kāinga Ōra through consentium. So I'm happy to answer any other questions in the report if I can.
Ka pai, I'll open it up, councillors, and just again, can we please keep the questions direct and clear, and also if you have any comments, make those succinct as well. Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, JP. I read the report and a couple of things stood out for me. So the subdivision consents, it said 300 on page 32, it referred to 300 potential lots, which included social housing. So were those figures actually included in what you just said? Or were they different?
There's two parts here. So if Kāinga Ōra is doing a subdivision, they need to get a resource consent from us. If they're just doing the building consents, they can process it themselves. So lot creations, everyone comes through us, but with building consents, they can process their own building consents. So, and again, lots that are identified here don't necessarily translate exactly into homes. So, and we all know that you could subdivide one lot and potentially you could put 1, 2, 3 houses on it. Something like Freedom Village, which was what we had last year, we actually had one lot with several hundred homes on it. The current Whananui Gardens being undertaken by Ngāti Whakaui up Whananui Road. I think the first stage has something like 80 homes on one lot.
So are you able to, do you know off the top of your head the figures that Kāinga Ōra are as part of that? No, okay.
Sorry.
Just a couple more, if you don't mind. What qualifies a development to be fast-tracked and how many of those have been selected?
Yeah, we've reported that previously, but I'll just go through again. Under the COVID legislation, so the government set up a COVID fast-tracking legislation in our district, and so it's not a case of us approving them. So an applicant makes a fast-track application to government. Government then asks us for additional information about what our thoughts are, and we're limited in what we can make comments on. 4 applications were submitted from the Rotorua Lakes district to government. 3 of those have been approved through to the next stage, which obviously now starts a process where additional information is received by councils, so both ourselves and the regional council, and there's a directive on who else should be engaged within that fast-tracking process. The management of those consents the processing of those consents, those fast tracks, is not done by the territorial local authority. We're just now an inputter. It is done through from the Ministry for the Environment to the Environmental Protection Agency. So they appoint their own commissioners and process those. And so obviously you've seen the report around Somerset is one of those that was approved to move to the next stage. There's 2 others for our district, 31 Nongataha Road and a business one out at Tahiki, so geothermal. So 2 residential and 1 geothermal development.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the Chair. JP, could I ask you, and apologies if I've missed it, if it is in here, for July, did we have any consent refunding, whether that be resource planning or building consents? Was there any refunds? And if so, would you be able to identify what the causes of those refunds were?
I would say, without question, we would have. And I've signalled previously that we're not achieving the level of service we expect in the resource consenting space. Building consenting may not be, but I think when I looked at our performance on the last financial year, we're sitting at about 95% within the statutory timeframes for building consent. 95, where we've generally got to about 97. So that was my recollection. So please, that's my memory of seeing those statistics. Within the resource consenting space, it's much lower, and we're well short of that. And I've highlighted issues we've got there with approximately half the staff we need within that consenting department. We're having to use externals to process consents, which also then creates a bit of a log jam on signing off of those. So we are doing refunds, and we are exceeding our 20 days in most cases. So it's an area of real concern for us. So we're trying our best to communicate with developers, because that clarity of how long it will take is really important. Sometimes it's been driven by requests for information or just delays in feedback, but from our perspective, our processing is not quick enough considering our pressures and time.
Thank you for that. May I ask, Mr. Chairman, in future, could we make an action point? I don't know if a formal resolution is required, but I think that's important for councillors to know moving forward, because obviously there are issues there that need to be addressed by us. So could I ask perhaps if we could have those as part of the monthly reports moving forward? Thank you.
Through Mr. Chair, I just wonder if the other part of it, the part of our key indicators around the long-term plan and picked up in the annual plan. Now, my understanding, I'm pretty sure we're meant to be doing quarterly reporting on those. So quarterly, we can make sure that's in place. It does give me time. We've got some business improvement processes that we signal in here that we're undertaking to try and work our way through those challenges. So probably on a quarterly basis, I can definitely bring that information to the table and also give you some comfort about, well, what are we doing about it?
Mr. Chairman, quarterly would be fine with me, so long as it's fine with Her Worship and also the Chair. Thank you.
That would satisfy you then, Councillor O'Brien. Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just if you could help me interpret this graph, 326 building consents last year. You say none of that is Kāinga Ora? Do I understand that correctly?
None of that is Kāinga Ora doing their own consents on their own properties. So though there is a mix of bases here. So Kāinga Ora are putting some of their own consents through Consentium. They have their own national consenting authority that they operate, BCA, Building Consent Authority. So 75 over the last financial year were done by Kāinga Ora themselves, which do not appear in these statistics. So they're on top of that. What I can't tell you here is if a private developer, and the reference has been to people like Watchman, we kind of know in some circumstances where Watchman is building homes, for example, Watchman Capital, but currently building a few homes for Kāinga Ora, but actually it's a private developer that's coming through here, so we can't necessarily do a back check on everyone to give you the certainty of how many of these have been done by private developers with a view that they have a relationship with Kāinga Ora.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There appear to be no more questions, and I just want to give fair time to the rest of our reports too. So with that, JP, thank you very much for your presentation and your report. I'd like to call up Mr. Colley. Thomas. Kaya koe te rā kau kōrero, as they say. The talking stick is all yours.
Thank you, Chair. And
before you move on, so I better got to remember this part. Can we get a mover and seconder, please, to receive this report? Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor O'Brien. All in favour, say aye. He whakahe, carried. Thank you very much. Now you can go.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. I'll take the report as read. This is obviously a new part of my group, so I'll try to answer the questions as best as I can as I learn the nuances of this group as well. What I will just highlight to you coming up is we anticipate bringing a report to you shortly around the commercialisation and the utilisation of the Performing Arts Centre. And in particular around some options and discussions around community use. So anticipate that report coming up shortly. In addition to that, the team is focusing on the Energy Event Centre. There's some maintenance that needs to be done on the fins, and we need to make a decision around removing the fins or fixing them, but also wider discussion around how the EEC fits now into the wider event space within New Zealand, with a number of new venues coming online, and the team are working on a small plan with regards to a light touch refurbishment with a goal of targeting new naming rights and corporate sponsorship to pay for that, and we'd hope to have some concept designs to you and look to have that inclusion into the LTP. With that, I'm happy to try and answer any other questions that you may have on the report.
Kia ora, open. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Thomas. Just one question you've already answered with the Sir Howard Morrison Centre plan coming forward, so I won't ask that. Thank you. The museum education, great to see a 113% increase in July. That's awesome. What's the ceiling for that program, and how does it compare with pre-COVID times?
That I'm not too sure on. I know the course, the education program itself in the last couple of years has shifted a focus to support the schools, in particular the primary schools around New Zealand history, shifting from the wider New Zealand history to local history, and in particular Te Arawa stories. And I'd imagine there's quite a high demand with that, with regards to the museum support, with regards to helping schools deliver local history. And from my understanding, that may be a little bit of the uplift that we're seeing, but I don't have the information available of how it compares pre-COVID. Sorry on that.
Okay. So do you have any idea of the mix between out-of-town schools versus local schools who are using our service?
I don't have the mix available, but what I do understand, talking to Stuart about it recently, was there is quite a large proportion of local schools, and as we said, the focus is predominantly on local history, which is why there's more of an uptake from our local schools, in particular primary schools.
Thank you.
Yep.
There appear to be no other questions. Hi, Thomas, and I appreciate that it's a new area for you to be reporting on. Look forward to you sorting out a nice little template there for us to be able to read through and get an update. So, Thomas, tēnā koe I o kōrero, nice and short, sweet. So, kia ora. So we'll move straight into our next one, which is actually, I've got to advise, it's going to go into public excluded, and I'm advising there's two items there. Confidential minutes from the Community and District Development Committee meeting held 9th of August 2023, and also an update on the Blue Baths process. So the reason we're going into public excluded is to protect information where the making available of the information would be unlikely or unreasonably to prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied or who is the subject of the information. So I would like to ask for a mover and a seconder to go into public excluded. Moved by Councillor Lee. Seconder? Oh, Councillor Barker. All in favour say aye. Aye. E whakahe, ka kua mana. So we'll just have time to turn off our